Friends podcast. I'm Josh Lindquist. My co-host Will Shaw is joining me today as we interview actor and recently author Tanner Kerrins. Tanner, thank you so much for joining us today. We're going to talk about your new book, Run Program. I can't wait to talk to you about it, man. This is going to be awesome.
Yeah, man, super excited.
Yeah. So for our listeners tuning in, your new book, which is Run Program, and the link's going to be in the podcast description, is available on Amazon. It launched 2 days ago, right?
Yeah, 2 days ago. I think the 13th?
Yeah. So yesterday. That's awesome.
Yeah.
That's exciting. Yeah, it's probably been a crazy 2 days, right?
It's been wild. Yeah. I tried to, you know, release it, post it on social media, do every sort of advertising I could think of, and honestly, friends, family, just people discovering the book, it's been incredible.
That's so awesome. And this is your first book that you've ever written, correct?
This is, yeah. I wanted to write a book for the longest time, but yeah, I think this is the first one that's an actual book that's released.
That's awesome.
Yeah. So then, did you do a lot of advertising ahead of time, like just prior to the release to get the momentum going, or did you just kind of launch it and then try to just blast it on social media?
I'm glad you asked. You mentioned a word momentum. I think that was my goal in trying to get the momentum going. But I actually started, I'd say, really advertising it a week out. So prior to that, I had completed the book. I had a draft that I was ready to release. So I submitted it for publishing, and that's when I posted on social media. I was like, "Hey everyone, I have a big surprise coming 1 week from now." And Instagram has a neat little function where you can put a timer. So I put a timer
Oh.
for 1 week out, and
Oh, that's cool. I didn't realize it had that feature. That's awesome.
yeah, I think that and sort of my mystery with it. I didn't release the title. I didn't release any information besides that.
Oh, that's cool.
Definitely caught some attention.
That's awesome. That's a really cool way to do it where there's that mystery factor. I've never thought of that before.
Yeah. What is the guy who they had J.J. Abrams his quote unquote mystery box method of just telling someone, well, there's a thing here. I'm not going to tell you what the thing is or give you any information about it, but there's a thing.
There's a thing, yeah.
Well, Tanner, tell us a little bit about the book. Like, what's the kind of initial premise? I know I've read the first chapter, and it's a cool setup. It wasn't what I expected, and I was like, "Where's this going to go?" So, I'd love to hear kind of your pitch to prospective readers, and then kind of talk about how the story came into being, like where the idea came from, how you developed it into the completed product it is now.
Right. Well, that's a lot to go off of, but to talk about the story, it's a science fiction story. I play around with a lot of sci-fi elements, like artificial intelligence
Nice.
and not so much sci-fi, but coding. I
Yeah.
grew up in Silicon Valley, so I was really used to coding, app development, and that entire scene.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and then that's actually a good transition into how the story came to be. I would say it's a collection of a lot of the things that I was just experiencing, that I grew up with, that I saw around the world. And the characters, I think they go through different character arcs of dealing with past trauma and dealing with depression. And I think those were things that, again, I saw in just everyday life, and I thought needed to be talked about.
Mm-hmm.
I just happen to talk about them in this science fiction aspect, which I really enjoy.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
So, how long did it take you to like write the book?
To give a general time frame, I started during 2020.
Yeah.
It was probably a few months after everything went into lockdown.
Yeah.
But I made a goal to write at least one chapter a day.
That's awesome.
And I think it's got like, I have a test copy from Amazon,
Oh,
thankfully.
awesome. Isn't that the
Um,
best feeling when you get that first hard copy?
it's so nice. Like, I think it has the matte finish, and I was just like,
Oh,
oh, it's
nice.
so good.
That's
Um,
awesome.
yeah, but it's got what, 21 chapters. I think my first draft I finished in anywhere from a month to a little over a month.
That's awesome. That's really fast completion for a first draft. That's awesome.
Yeah, that doesn't include like all the editing. Like that took
Oh yeah.
a
Mhm.
few months after that, but if I'm including that, I would say it took a few months to actually get something together, something that I was ready to present to people.
That's awesome. Yeah, I think that consistency when you because plenty of people have the idea of like, oh, I want to write a book, but like it's that daily follow through that's really
Mhm.
what makes it happen. So that's really cool.
Yeah, I this might this might be going on a little tangent, but I'm glad you mentioned that because when I first started advertising it, I mentioned that
Mhm.
I mean I don't think it's a secret to people that I grew up with dyslexia. I still deal with dyslexia, um,
Mhm.
and I think consistency, whether it's regarding reading or writing a book,
Mhm,
consistency, just getting up every day and saying, "Look, I'm going to try and tackle this."
mhm. Yeah,
Um, I'm glad you mentioned that because I think that was sort of the driving factor that can forced me to keep churning out chapters.
yeah. No, that's huge, man. And to overcome that and to really sit down and say, here's my goal, and I'm going to work around whatever obstacles get thrown at me. Like that's really awesome. That's really cool.
Mhm.
Definitely, definitely.
Yeah.
So that said, though, if you're like I definitely can appreciate the need for consistency there. Um, would you say you're more of a planner then? Did you like plot out your chapters and everything up front, and are like, okay, I'll do this much this day, this much the next day, or what's kind of your process there?
My process, I started with essentially the table of contents, or like a brainstorming session. I early on I said, look, here's where I want the characters to start. Here's different chapters of different scenarios, different obstacles that I think they can go through, and then at some point I want them to be at the end. I maybe I learned it from when I went to university. My focus was in screenwriting,
Nice.
so I had this idea early on. Here's the starting point. Here's the ending point.
Yeah.
Um, but I digress. In planning that out, I like I said, I had a table of contents. I knew what I wanted to write before I wrote it, and then it just went back to every day. I'm gonna start with that piece, go to that piece, go to next, and then it all compiled into what it is here.
That's awesome. I had a question and it just fell right out of my brain. I don't know where it was
Oh
going, but
no.
Oh,
it'll come back into that. Will help me out. Save
while
me.
you find while you find that, I'm a big believer in like cross discipline
Mm,
learning. And so like as an actor,
mhm.
like how big do you think that like how much of that were you able to use towards writing a book, and how much do you think writing a book is gonna improve your acting?
That's a good question.
That is a very
That's
good
a
question.
yeah. Dang, that's a really good question. I need a second to think about that. So don't mind me. Uh,
Yeah, by all means.
I would say that in the process of publishing this book, what I learned from acting, just being confident, and uh, I think I had very limited acting classes, but everything that I've learned through experience and those limited acting classes is just being confident, putting in the work of memorizing a script, working with your scene partner. And I think in terms of writing the book, um, I just kept trying to remain confident and collaborate with everyone. I have some incredible friends who took the time to edit the book. I said, hey, really random request, but could I get your help with this? And the confidence I think really helped. I really said, look, this is what I'm gonna do. I have my goals to get each chapter and then to finally publish it. And now that it's out, I think I have more confidence going back to acting that I can actually tell a story that um, I know how to talk to my audience better. Um, and I think it goes back and forth, having those different elements that support either work I'm doing.
No, that's awesome because yeah, actually, our last episode that just came out today, our guest had a good quote where she said like, because she's also an author, she said, if you wait around for people to give you permission to tell your story, you're just going to be waiting. So she said, you got to give yourself permission and just go out and get it. And you've done that. It's awesome, man. That's so cool.
Definitely. That's probably a better way to say it. Dang, I should have just.
Shout out to our last guest, Emma Jean, for giving us a good quote that I'm sure I'll quote on many podcasts in the future. But no, I can't remember what question I had before, but based on Will's question, I do have a question for you. So for our audience to know, me and Tanner met when we were both playing wedding guests in a little movie called Last Call in the Doghouse. And
Oh man.
do you know where we can watch that movie? I haven't seen it yet. Have you seen it?
I haven't seen it. Honestly, I totally forgot what it was. We filmed that like before the pandemic. That was
Yeah,
like
I
2
think
years
it
ago.
was the December or November before the pandemic, and we went out to that ranch up north of LA and
Yeah.
filmed the little wedding sequence. And well, we had Judy Geeson was in the scene with us from she did a movie with Sidney Poitier back in the day.
Right.
Yeah, she was cool. That was awesome.
Huh.
Dude, yeah, I'd love to see where that movie ended up.
I know, right? Because I remember like the director came and like was telling all of us the plot, and I
Yeah.
could just see the first AD like, you don't need to tell him the plot. They're like background guys, like we don't need to tell them. But he was
Yeah.
telling us about the movie, and it was just like I was like, I really want to see this now because I have no idea what he's talking about. So
Yeah. Like, oh gosh, what was I doing just recently? There's a movie on Netflix, which I don't know if I can legally disclose it yet,
yeah.
but we were acting in it was like a Coachella type festival, and
Oh,
that one was much better about getting the camera in our face and saying like, okay, we're gonna like dance around, we're gonna have like pyrotechnics going off,
that's cool.
and depending on the production, you could be doing a lot more action. I've been doing a lot more auditions, a lot more speaking roles, a lot more. I should clarify, auditioning for lead roles. That
Oh,
is just
nice.
very busy.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh my gosh, the cat's there.
We try to have a cat cameo in every podcast. That's always our goal. But so
uh,
to circle it back from my crazy tangent back to your book, what like since there's a lot of like you mentioned programming and that element of technology present in the book,
mhm.
like did you have to do like a lot of research? Or I know you mentioned you grew up in Silicon Valley, so like you had some familiarity with that industry already. Like to make it realistic with those constraints of technology, like how much research played into that there, or how did that kind of affect your
Um,
story?
yeah, I think I did a bit of research. I tried to research ways that you could get different programs from one spot to another. Um, because when I grew up, I actually took like some coding camps, they called them. So I knew the basics that there were like different coding languages, that there are ways to box different sections of code together
Okay.
to
Mhm.
perform different functions. Like I knew all the basics, but I didn't know like, I don't have a doctorate in computer programming.
Oh yeah.
So um, I would say the book is my baseline knowledge and a little bit of research when you get to the end of the book, just to help the story move along and to help the characters with their different objectives.
Totally. That
Yeah.
makes sense. Yeah.
Well, and I mean, it's not like coding is very complicated. We all know that like the way that you code is you just type really fast on your keyboard while bright lights come across the
I
screen.
know at least a dozen people in my hometown who are just like, "Oh my gosh, no!"
It is all catching fire.
Right.
Yeah.
Our
Uh,
podcast is going to be hacked now. Will, thank you. No,
Yeah.
uh,
what
no, but
I wanted to ask you with the publishing process because I've published through Amazon as well, and I found it to be a really it's some parts of the process were much easier than I expected, and then other parts have been more difficult. So I'm curious, like, what was the part that was like the easiest for you, and then what part was the most challenging of the whole publishing process?
right. Well, funny enough, I got your help through the Amazon process, but I think the easiest part was actually uploading the manuscript.
Yep.
Because early on, I mean, going through Amazon, you can really quickly see, like if you have a Kindle version, if the format is right. Same
Yep.
thing for paperback. You can see if I mean, I could fix the format in maybe 10 minutes.
Yeah.
It's super quick and understandable. I think the toughest part for me was actually the end where I went through publishing it. And
Well, what are
uh,
some of your goals now that you're a writer? Like, what do you have any future literary goals or?
oh, that's a good question. I have another book which I wrote after this, and I actually wanted to publish it before,
Oh,
but I think I made like a very amateur mistake, and I put it on the back burner and just forgot about it. But I would like to write another book. Um, I would like to do that in the next. Actually, I don't know what a time frame is because I already have a book sort of set up. I think I'd like to get it at least to a better draft in the
Mhm.
next couple of months.
totally.
Um,
But I think the first book is always the hardest. Like once you know you can do it, it's like you're
Yeah.
like, okay, I can do another one. Like
oh
it's
yeah,
yeah. So that's exciting, man. That's cool.
totally, totally.
Is your second book a totally separate thing, or is it related to the run program?
No, so that would be a totally separate one.
Okay.
The I've always wanted. This is actually a good teaser for people. I've always wanted to write a science fiction epic, and I say
Ooh,
epic like Frank Herbert's Dune, The
yes.
Foundation.
I love
Um,
Foundation. Asimov is a genius.
oh yeah, it's
Yeah.
so good.
Mhm.
Um, but that was what I was trying to write with this. I'll call it the secondary book. So to anyone who watches your podcast, I think that's what they can look forward to. I'd love to write another book, and I'd love for it to be a science fiction epic.
Well, I love science fiction epics, so I can't wait to read that.
Yeah.
And I can't wait to finish your book too, because like I said, that first chapter was really like the pacing and the way you express the characters' emotions really gripped me early on. And I feel
Yeah,
like that's the hardest thing, like at least for me as an author, is like when you're initially introducing characters, like it's easy to just start describing like surface level characteristics, you know. But
yeah.
for us, like or for your book, like you really get the reader like to see what the character's feeling. And I was like,
Mhm.
okay, like that was just a solid intro. So that's really exciting, man.
You don't know how giddy I am right now. That's so great to hear.
Yeah,
Yeah, I
for
think
sure.
those are kind of like some of the big things that any creator really wants because like anybody can just create something of, oh, I like this character, they seem nice. Saying that you relate to a character, it's just such a much better compliment. And like I'm not a writer, I'm an illustrator. And
Mhm.
so like the equivalent is like I really feel this piece. When somebody like looks at something and is like, this connects with me, that's the best feeling in the world.
Totally, totally.
With the science fiction book that you've already published, the fiction epic on the that you put on the back burner, what is it about science fiction that you find so compelling?
Um, I I think it falls into like I've always loved this
Mhm.
idea of extraordinary things, and um I think it connects to my answer. If we're talking about the film world, I've always loved sort of that mystical. I always define space as being mysterious and otherworldly,
Mhm.
mystical, which is always something that I'd love to explore. And on a more grounded level, I've had discussions with other family members who love reading, and I think science fiction is a good way to critique society or to critique
Mhm.
elements of humanity. And not to sound cliche or overly poetic, but I think those different, like the surreal aspect of it and the ground level of it, I think there's a lot to play with science fiction.
Mhm.
I 100% agree. Yeah.
Oh
That's
yeah,
why
for
I'm
sure.
drawn towards like science fiction as well, because it's like kind of the best way we can explore like future possibilities of where humanity is heading. It's almost like the scientific method where you have a theory and then you test it. Since we
Mhm.
can't test that stuff yet, we're doing the next best thing and like just sitting and like digesting it and exploring it and like sifting through it, you know,
Mhm.
emotionally and ethically. And that, yeah, that's why I love good sci-fi, you know. So
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. Like the scientific process, but
It's like
It
the
is.
next best thing. Yeah,
Yeah,
the
yeah.
closest we can do. So that's awesome, man. Well, yeah. To everyone listening in, I mean, go on Amazon, type in Tanner Kerrins or type in Run Program. The link will be in this podcast. Check it out. Tanner, thank you so much for being on Nerds and Friends, man. This has been great.
Yeah, totally. Thank you for bringing me on. It's been a real pleasure.
Of
Yeah.
course, man.
And aside from your book, where can our audience find you?
Well, I have an Instagram. It's just my name, Tanner Kerrins at Tanner Kerrins.
Yeah.
I have a website, tannerkerrins.weebly.com.